Thank you, Chairman. Just apologies from Councillor Collins this morning.
Have we any declarations of interest? Meeting of 13th November 2014 for noting. And item 4 is the shape of the Council Business Transformation Steering Group. With the report before, is anything to add, Mr. Haswell?
It's the Chief's report, sir. I think we're recommending that members look at a transformational board. It's for members to determine, but you may consider the smaller you make it, the better. And the suggestion is either 7 or 11. So it's really a member decision. You're also being asked if you want to take trade union representatives along. The recommendation from the council is that you do. The question is, do you have one, or do you look at all of the trade unions who are officially recognised by the council? In which case, or all of the trade unions who have a semi or a full-time representative, and you've got 3 of those. You've got Unite, EIS, and Unison. So we're really in member hands. I don't know if the Chief wants to add anything to that, or just participate in the debate.
Chair, no, I just think that to restate what Mr. Haswell said, I think it's important that we do have the trade unions around the table, and if that's going to be the case, then I would be urging members perhaps to have a smaller member representation so that the group can actually have the dynamic. I think as members realise, as the numbers spread, it's more difficult to have the type of scrutiny dialogue and conversation. And also I think that if we're bringing trade unions on, the more members, the more intimidated they might feel as part of that process. But I think it's about, if we want it to be a dynamic committee working, I would recommend a smaller rather than larger, but of course it's a members' decision.
Because my own thoughts, Councillor Smith?
I would agree with that point, in that if you have 11 and say potentially 3 trade unions, which tend to be sort of the largest 3 in the council, it would be too unwieldy. I would be quite in favour of the 7 and 3 trade unions representatives. I think that would be a manageable number.
Okay, Councillor Geddes?
I would agree entirely with that, sir. Maybe even go one further. If we're talking, Chair, about certainly 7 would be my view, but I'll exclude myself from what I'm about to say. I think there's a fair bit of cerebral capacity sitting around this table on the basis of this subcommittee. So at the end of the day, why not make the subcommittee your board?
Well, that was my thoughts as well, and I would certainly go along with that if members are happy. I think we've got enough expertise around the table here without having to set up another subcommittee of the council, quite frankly. Yeah. I mean, most of it has been through all the standing orders and schemes of delegation, so we've got a fair idea of the setup of the council in any case. Someone's been here a long time, been involved in district councils, regional councils and this authority, so I think the expertise is here, and I'm happy to go along with that if other members are. Any viewpoints? Councillor Brodie?
And obviously the subcommittee is allowed substitutes anyway, so if there are more experienced substitutes available, then you can always bring them on.
Members happy to recommend that this committee become the substantive committee. And question of trade union representatives, so there's 3 trade unions. It'd be easier to invite all 3 than try and get them to nominate 1 or 2. Members would be happy to invite a rep of all 3 the trade unions. Happy to go along with that. Anyone otherwise minded? No?
Can I just check, Chairman? You'll see at paragraph 3.1 through to 3.5, we are suggesting a modus operandi, for want of a better term, for this board. Are members happy with 8 weekly meetings as a minimum? So you're quite happy that we go ahead with that?
I think if we lay that down as a template, we need to meet more often, so be it. I think that's a fair assessment.
Okay.
Is there any other matters in this report? Gavin?
Chair, I'm just wondering whether or not, once members have taken the decision in March, or the full council, about the way forward with the directors, once the directors have been formally appointed, I was just wondering whether one of the first meetings would be to ask the directors along to explain their initial thoughts and visions for the service, so therefore members with an understanding of what might be coming in future papers, give a chance for this committee to ask questions in a sort of closed chamber with the directors. Obviously, just their early thoughts, because that's part of the interview process, as I'm asking them to give some early thoughts about how they would want to take it forward. It would allow members that early opportunity. So that would allow that first meeting to be programmed around that.
Members happy? Yep. Are there any other issues in this? Ian?
You've now went through the recommendations. You spoke about one subject. Just as you go through the decision, I'm fine with the 7, and I'm happy that this is the representative. We've got substitutes and that in place. Happy with the unions and that representation, what you've said. So I'm not getting issues, but I just like to be clear that we're going through the recommendation, making decisions as we should.
If there are no further questions, can we go to the recommendations? 2.1, to note the arrangements for programme management. 2.2, consider proposed arrangements for working in the business transformation steering group as detailed at 3.136. 2.3, consider elected member representation. Agreed that. And 2.4, consider number of trade union representatives. And we agreed that as well. Members happy with the recommendations? Okay, thank you all very much. And move on to item 5. Shape of the Council Service Committee structure. Alex, this you front.
Again, this is very much a scoping paper, Chairman. We're looking for advice to bring a more detailed paper to you as to how you see the committee structure of the Council moving forward in terms of the reshaping of the Council. Obviously, you've seen what the remit of each of the different departments will be. I think we're trying to align the political decision-making processes in that. If I could maybe make a plea, Chairman, that while social work is not specifically going to be a departmental, you're going to have your joint board and things like that. I think there is a need to make sure that social work practice is embedded in the Council's decision-making processes, and that you should consider looking at some form of social work arrangement. Also, DG First will be being divided up, and it may be that you want to look at maybe, rather than having a subcommittee of the EEI committee, which I think, looking at the chairman of EEI, has regularly 20 to 30 items on the agenda. I don't think you can really stand. You'd have to increase the number of meetings, or alternatively, you might consider having a board of members who would look at the more detailed operational matters affecting service delivery in terms of refuse collection, burial grounds and things like that. These are merely suggestions, Chairman. I'm in members' hands. I'll just take what members tell me they're looking for, and we'll bring back a report to your next meeting outlining hopefully what you've given, the ideas you've given us this morning.
Thank you. Colin?
I think for me the starting point of any committee structure has to be to follow the departmental structure as closely as possible. I think we've got a couple of anomalies that take place at the moment around housing, for example, is an obvious one, and so we have a CCS committee that particular department, if you like, oversees housing. However, it's the EI committee that have responsibility for that, because obviously the structures didn't follow the internal departmental changes that took place there. So I think the very basic thing is that the committee should follow the departments, because actually the committee should ultimately follow the budgets, and the decisions that a committee takes around the budget, they have to have full responsibility for that department's budget, I think, and that's the starting point. One of the difficulties, though, over the suggestion of a board for DG First or whatever is it, I think one of the issues that members have with the current structure is almost you get it played off against each other. That actually you want a committee that makes a decision, and when that decision is taken, it's implemented and done, and if it doesn't happen, then the committee have the role of scrutinising exactly why it doesn't happen. If you effectively have a separate committee structure, that means that the EI committee take decisions, but a separate board, if you like, effectively oversees the implementation of those, then you don't deal, I think, with that current issue that we have at the moment, whereby effectively you've got, is it a DG First matter, is it an EI committee matter? And I think that would be a concern that I certainly would have. I would also be intrigued to know how a social work committee would actually work. Effectively, you have a children's, young people and lifelong learning department, and there'll be more integration around that, I think, in the longer term. And how would a social work department, effectively, a social work committee actually work in a practical terms? Would you have effectively playing off each other? So I'm a bit concerned about that. I just think that committees must follow the budget, they must follow the department, and they must be able to make decisions that they have implemented when that decision is made.
I don't disagree, and the intention is that it will follow the department and the budget. I think what I'm suggesting is, in terms of social work, and you've always got to go back to previous practice and history to look at it. When we previously had the committee that oversaw education, social work, children, social work became the poor relative, particularly in terms of professional social work practice. I think it would be a good sign or a good message to give to the community at large that the council take the professional social work and the quality of delivery of social work seriously. It also would allow your chief social work officer to have a direct reporting line to a committee of the council. Whether it would meet quarterly or half yearly or not, I don't know. It was just an idea I had that I think members would want to flag up your vulnerable adults, your vulnerable children. They are key priorities for the council. It was an idea. If members don't want to take it on board, I'm happy just to drop it. But it was something that I had flagged up from a previous life, so to speak, where you finished up with the committee dealing with 20 education matters, and if the then Director of Social Work chose to put something to committee, they did, or perhaps they didn't.
I've got to agree with Alec. I think we've got to learn the lessons of the past. And we've made these super departments in the past. I think we put the leisure facilities in with education. The same thing happened there. It just seemed to be an add-on to education. It wasn't treated as a separate entity. And it's one of the reasons why we got the Environmental Health and Trading Standards to report to the CCS committee, because they weren't getting a fair shot within the ambit of the old PH&S committee. I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to have the departments. Whether the committees need to mirror the departments isn't necessary. I think the important thing is that members have got a good grasp on what's going on at the coal face, if you like. I think there was faults in the past, but particularly where it was seen that was a takeover by education of the Social Services Committee, because the Director of Education remained in his same office. I think that's something we've got to learn. Whoever gets appointed to head up these new fiefdoms can't sit in their present office. We'll have to look at the relocation of the management structures. Because if you keep them in the same position, anybody else that goes into that new bigger department is going to see it as a takeover. No matter how professional they are, they still see it that way. Alistair, did you want to come in?
Thanks very much indeed, Chair. As far as I'm concerned, the two most important aspects of the report are the last sentence in paragraph 3.2, which Colin has already addressed at length, and as far as I'm concerned, I'm certainly not going to rehearse it. I'll merely say that I agree entirely with that and with Colin's comments. The other one that I feel particularly is of particular importance as well, sir, is paragraph 3.3, and I'm looking at that, I'm choosing to interpret that, as it were, from the point of view of the principle of subsidiarity. In other words, delegate, to the lowest level possible of sustaining it and dealing with it. And I think we should be looking, it's not the cheapest of systems, a decentralised system, but I think as a matter of principle, we should in fact be looking at developing that as well, consistent with the resources which are available to us. So I have no problems with the terms of the report and with the comments that's been made by colleagues thus far, Chair. Thank you.
Ian?
I think what Colin says makes a lot of common sense, but in practical terms it'd be difficult to deliver. I did think strongly yesterday about bringing it up and using it as a political football, because in real terms, if we do what Colin's proposing, we need a reduction in senior councillors on the council, because we're reducing the amount of oversight that they have. We're reducing the committee structure. But I thought about it long and hard and seriously, and I thought, well, what is actually the best way to go forward? Because I'd seen sight of this as well, and I think it probably is, as we discussed. You need to look at each service on its own merits. Make sure we haven't got these. I agree with what Alex pointed out to us, 21, 30 agenda items. By the time once you get over 18, that's it. The game's lost. You may as well just forget about it. The decision making becomes very poor at best. So I think maybe we should leave it a wee bit bigger. But the most important thing for me, other than what's been pointed out already, in particular what it's saying, 3.2, 3.3, is that we get a full and open presentation. Not just here's a committee paper, you've read it, there's your options, I want a full presentation. I would like to see a report coming back saying, this is your options, with a full and thorough debate to talk about and bottom these things out, or this is the type of thing I'll certainly be bringing up, is about reduction in senior councillors because of the new committee structures and taking options like that. I want it to be open and transparent, and as it stands at the moment, I'm in favour of keeping the level that's there for the sake of not having too long agendas.
Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I'm sorry, I'm here representing in place of Brian today in the short term, but Alex got a list of some changes we've made for the foreseeable future, just to explain why I'm here. Alec knows, and the Chief to a limited extent know, that actually in the old education social work, that big conglomerate, I kind of represented the rights of the social work team and they weren't valued. But taking that into the modern era here, we've got a situation here, if we don't have a social work committee, there is a danger that the bits of social work that are going to move between the children and families part and the adult health social care part will have nowhere to go. Right? And there's no overall scrutiny to make sure that joined up bit is there. And that's why I think there's merit in what Alec was suggesting, is that we actually, that's why one of the reasons you do need a social work committee, that just as an extra, how can I put it, we can't afford to get it wrong, I think is what I'm saying, and an extra check and balance is a good thing. It would be up to this committee, or whoever, the full council of course, to decide exactly what gives support to that committee, but I think it's absolutely crucial we have it. And it's more an audit of professional standards, I would suggest, and things like that, bearing in mind that the integration board will have a role and responsibility there, and it also helps Lillian, I would suggest, the Chief Social Work Officer, move between the two, and as Alec so rightly says, a platform to councillors on adult issues.
Paul?
I think we've got to think through the practicalities and avoid the anomalies we've got at the moment. Let me just give you a very brief example of an anomaly. There are elements of the current PES department that are overseen by the Community and Customer Services Committee at the moment because a change that was made. So you had a report going to, and it's a very small example, but it actually highlights the issue, a report going to Community and Customer Services Committee about the Seagull initiative we've got in Dumfries. A report saying this is the Seagull initiative, this is what we spend our money on, this is what it does. That committee, if they had decided, well actually we don't think that initiative is enough, we want to see it increased, they actually had no power to do that because the budget was determined by the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee. So while the report on that initiative went to one committee, the budget was set by another committee. And effectively, if you've got a situation at the moment where the what would, I suppose, potentially be the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Committee would determine the overall budget for that department, and the Social Work Committee then decided, actually, we've got a particular issue with something, you have to be very clear that who actually sets the budget and who makes those decisions. And I think that's the difficulty we've got at the moment, and how we have to make sure we don't have anomalies on that. Do you effectively have some sort of structure whereby DG First, if you like, is a subcommittee of EI, or Housing is a subcommittee of CCS, or Social Work is a committee, but it's made up of members of the Children's, Young People, etc. committee? I think you've got to look at that particular issue, but you have to avoid a situation where you have anomalies whereby the departments don't follow the structure. And that's what we have at the moment. Departments don't follow the structure. Committees don't follow the council structure, and most importantly, budgets don't. So your members actually have no authority over that particular issue because there's nothing you can do about the budget.
I think Councillor Smith's absolutely right. I'm not suggesting that we follow the same structures we've got at the moment. What I'm suggesting, you're getting an opportunity here to, as the Chief said yesterday, to bring forward a council structure that's going to be fit for purpose for the next 5 years. If we do the committee remits properly, and if we get guidance from the members, what I intend to do is go away and look at the remit based on the fact that, as Councillor Geddes pointed out, they'd be totally or closely aligned to the organisational arrangements. So you do have that ability to say the remit of the Social Work Committee is professional social work standards. It does not have any budgetary control, and it's got to work within, it would be made up of members of the Children and Young Persons or Children and Learning, and also it would need to follow the budget decisions taken by that. It could maybe then come back and make recommendations. I do take the point, it's quite frustrating that we've got housing within CCS, but the budget isn't necessarily controlled by CCS. And I think we can take the opportunity, hopefully in bringing a more detailed report to members, to take these issues on board.
And I think the other frustration at the moment is that you may get a situation, say it happens at the moment, EI committee will say, right, here's the commission for DG First. We want certain things done and we think it's contained within the commission. It then goes to DG First and it goes to DG First committee, and actually a report will go to DG First and they'll basically say, well, that isn't really in the commission. And you get departments being played. I mean, you know, go around bus shelters anywhere in Dumfries and Galloway, you tell me when they were last cleaned, as the chair of the EEI committee, I'll sit there and the committee will agree a commission that we believe includes cleaning bus shelters, and then a report will go to DG First committee that basically says, well, actually we didn't clean bus shelters really, because it's not really in the commission. You know, we cannot, you know, we have to be able to make a decision and implement those decisions. So I think that's important. We can't have effectively a subcommittee or another committee playing off a department. I think that's really important that we avoid that happening.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that we've got a joined up committee structure that which encourage corporate working. I think Colin's right that having the two committees at loggerheads is definitely not the way forward. PES or EI, whatever it is, and DG First at loggerheads, it's not a way forward. And I think the challenge is to how we get this children, young people, and lifelong learning committee working with the social work department. I think that is going to be a challenge, and perhaps there are models elsewhere that have worked in the country which we could look at in a future report. And also we've got a committee which deals with children, young people, but we don't have any mention in the committee structure of older people and adults who receive services from the council. So how do they fit into the structure?
You want to come back in?
Yes, thanks, Tom. The Borders inquiry was quite clear. Gavin knows it inside out. The problem in the Borders was the lack of oversight and leadership, amongst other things, where we took, I'll say the global we, took the children into care but left the mother in an abusive situation because the two adult and social care and childcare weren't really talking to each other. I think that's a fair summing up. And the recommendations in that, this is, and it was universally agreed in Scottish Parliament that was a practice that had to stop. This was way before any current administration or anything like that at all. It must be at least 10 years ago now. But the lessons of that are quite clear. Is there has to be a conduit and a form of leadership here where we can actually question the practice between the adult and child protection and other models. And I think you're right, Colin, in terms of budgetary terms and everything else, that has to be quite clear because the adult budget will be in, quite rightly, in the other body. So it's only the childcare budget and children and family social work budget will be under the new super department. But how do we deal with the professional issues that arise because we can't just treat a family in isolation. We can't treat the older person in isolation or the child in isolation. You have to look at the whole family. And that is the reporting mechanism that Chief Social Work Officer, I would suggest, would relish because it lets all the council know exactly what's happening all over the place. And it might be what you're suggesting here is actually a subcommittee or a smaller size committee rather than a big fully blown committee.
I mean, we're not being asked to make a decision today, but obviously that's a lot of food for thought for members to take back to their individual groups. I mean, probably what end up with major committees that mirror departments, which then means you probably end up with a plethora of subcommittees, whether that's a healthy thing to have or not, or whether you say, okay, that's the departments for management purposes, but you can have committees that are responsible for looking at specific services. And I certainly agree that the history we've had of social work, not just in this area but across Britain, it's something that really as elected members we should be keeping our eye on, and I have grave fears myself if it's tagged on to all the extra stuff that's going under the education banner. You're sitting there at a meeting and if social work happens at the tail end of the agenda, you know what happens, folk are anxious to get away home and things don't get proper scrutiny. But I think there's a number of issues there, Alec, that you can take away and have a look. I mean, there's one committee missing out here, and that's the Employment Appeals Committee. That's not in there. And I think, again, if you go back to the system we had before, appointment appeals is a non-political quasi-judicial thing, the same as the civic government licensing panel, and whether you want to merge them, you tend to find it's just the same members in both of them anyway. Just make that one committee, because in the case of the licensing panel, you're perming any 7 from 19, and the same when you're at employment appeals hearings, that's perming 7 from 19 as well. And that might simplify the process with that kind of background panel. Colin?
I think, yeah, I mean, I think that there's another committee missing from the list in terms of the Crichton committee isn't on the list as well, and that I presume still exists. The ad hoc subcommittee for economy, environment, infrastructure, you know, given the fact that that job was to implement a policy that no longer exists, well, you know, that I'm presuming that'll disappear. I mean, I'm presuming that when the new department structure was created, you know, the piece of work you were doing, I'm probably simplifying it here, but you have a list of services that need to be provided, and you were slotting them into the different areas and deciding, you know, and there was obviously clearly from the reports and background papers we got a lot of debate as to whether this service went into there and that service went into there, and how that would work in practical terms. That's the type of discussion we need as a committee when it comes to, you've got a list of delegated powers at the moment, and I think we need to be sitting down in some shape or form with the guidance of officers and recommendations or suggestions or options from officers, and effectively do that piece of work. That we know this is a delegated power. Does it go into that committee? Does it go into that committee? Or where does it go in that actual whether that's done through this committee meeting or a seminar before this committee meeting to actually go through those practical suggestions, I think is the best way. So we can see what all the delegated powers are, and we can be very clear what's getting slotted into where, basically. I think that would be a piece of work we could certainly do.
That's forgetting we had that appendix with the other committees on it. And you're right, appointment appeals is in there. Crichton subcommittee is in there as well. And I think that committee shouldn't be there anyway. I think that it was there to be a shadow kind of committee when we set up the new format at Crichton. So that committee should really...
Right, Chair, you've got to agree the business plan for that organisation on an annual basis, and that's a remit of the Crichton committee. We have to do that. We own the Crichton at the end of the day.
It'd be easier just to take anything to do with the Crichton to the Policy and Resources Committee. It's not long since this committee met.
I think just to be helpful, I think that perhaps along with, as Councillor Smith says, we've already got a structural map that you could put in a bit of A3 for members to see about where we think the services currently sit at that detail. That would be very helpful, I think, to start the next debate. I think there's also an issue about how our committee is actually structured just now, because I think that there's the strategy, there's policy, there's performance, and there's scrutiny. And I think if we did a piece of work that said how actually much time is being given to those elements, it might then start to indicate that perhaps one of the issues that we're not really doing is because there's so much business, the scrutiny and performance. So it might mean a restructuring of the timetable for, rather than try and fit it into busy agendas, it becomes the purpose of an agenda. So we could bring back options around that, but I think that bit of evidence about, because of the sheer workload on I was going to say EEI, that we need to look at. I think that's important to inform. So if we have the structural map about where we think services might be going, delegations, that piece of work analysis about how our committee is actually operating just now would allow members to start off with that evidence in front of them and inform the debate. On the social work issue, the children's new department is children, will have children and families. Adults is where we need to square it. But I think the lesson from Rotherham that members will need to consider in moving forward is there does need to be somewhere where professional practice is subject to member scrutiny. So that may well be a totally different type of committee than we've had before, and members would probably want to explore that with perhaps the trade unions around the table around how that would look. It's one of the issues we're wrestling with, professional practice in adult health and social care, and there's a paper coming to Adult Health and Social Care Board talking about the complexities. But I think, so rather than it being a traditional subcommittee as we've had, we would look to flesh out how could members scrutinise and receive the proper assurances in professional practice, so something like a Rotherham could never happen in Dumfries and Galloway. So therefore, if you start there, that would start to frame it differently than a budget and policy area. And I think so therefore, we will work to bring a suite of starting papers for you for the next meeting. So you start off with all we know in front of you to help you frame your agenda and discussions from there.
Thanks for that, Gavin. I mean, I think, you know, to be fair, there's no rush to accomplish this. I mean, we're far better to take it nice and steady and hopefully get it right than rush into something. So are members happy to accept recommendation 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3? Thank you. And we'll get further reports as and when, and perhaps even a seminar for all members on the way forward. Thank you. Move on to item 6, review standing orders scheme of delegations.
My apologies. I'm sorry, Chairman, I apologise. No use me sitting this side of the chairman, that's my problem. What we're doing is tidying up some anomalies which members particularly have identified over the course of committee meetings. At the moment, in terms of planning, an elected member can ask for something to be brought forward to the planning committee. They maybe then later on get some more information which makes them consider they don't want it to go to planning committee, and there's no mechanism for withdrawing that. So we're giving individual members, it's empowering the individual members to say, I've decided I don't want that to go to planning committee, because things do change over a period of weeks. The second one is in relation to, there's been some discussion by members where they have attended perhaps a meeting has resulted in an application being deferred for some purpose, mainly for site visits or mainly for more information. If a member's not been at the original one and people have spoken at it, the question arises as to whether that member is then fully informed when they come to the decision-making process. That's one that was raised specifically by members, so we're hoping to tidy that up in terms of the Planning Applications Committee scheme of delegation, and also an issue in relation to Employment Appeals Subcommittee. We've had issues where a member has tendered an apology, we've found another member, that member then gets the papers at relatively short notice and goes, oh my goodness, I can't go to that. Do they then attend and record their dissent, or if they don't attend, do we record them as being an apology? So we're trying to tidy that up. These were all issues raised by members with the individual committee advisors and committee clerks. So hopefully we're addressing the issues that are in members' minds, and we're recommending these minor amendments to you.
Alistair, any in?
I've been quite unashamed about it, sir. I'm picking your brains. In relation to 2.2, you know, there's an anomaly there, is there not, Chair, between the practice at a local review body and the practice at the Planning Applications Committee? And I would like your comments, Chair, as to why that should be the case.
I totally agree with you, because it was me that asked for this to come forward. I mean, as the law stands, if you remember, the local review body and a site visit is called for, and you don't attend that site visit, you can't take part in the subsequent debate. And I think that should apply to the full committee. I always find it terribly wrong that 10 or 11 members will go on a site visit, and then we come back here and we have other members who haven't attended the site visit. No matter, some say they've got local knowledge anyway, but that's neither here nor there. But if members take the time to go on a site visit to see things, I think you're being disrespectful to both the applicant and any objectors if folk are going to sit there and make a decision with less information than other members have got. So it's purely a tidying up exercise. If you don't go on the site visit, you don't take part in the decision. Simple as. Alistair?
I'm grateful to you, sir, for the response, and presumably, you know, it was provided at law in relation to local review bodies because it was felt to be the appropriate thing to do. And if it's good enough for a local review body, Chair, for the record, I would support you entirely if you're going to suggest, in fact, that should be exactly the same system that pertains in relation to the full Planning Application Committee. And saying that, I've not always been the greatest of attenders, you know, at site visits. And certainly, you know, I do try to get whenever I can. But the last one that you and I were at was, well, I'll not say any more, that the weather was absolutely dreadful, but that's neither here nor there. I think in all seriousness, it's a very good point you're making without sounding patronising, and if you're prepared to move that, I certainly would be keen to support it.
I'm happy to move that.
We'll take that on board, sir. No.
I've just been, I don't agree with what either of you have just said in regards to took advice from the Standards Commission. Chief Investigating Officer Stuart Allen stood up and said, as soon as you've got your papers, you can make a decision on a planning application. So that flies completely in the face of what the Standards Commission are giving us advice on. So why would we make a decision with for somebody, if they haven't been on a site visit, then sure, it would work both ways then. If you have to go on a site visit, now, because other folk have been on a site visit, but they've been and seen that, they've got that information in their head already. But I've been to that site 1,000 times in the past before. No, but you have to be in that site visit to understand what it really looks like. It's ridiculous to say the least when the Standards Commission, who are the overarching body who decide and how we should conduct ourselves at the end of the day, it is how we behave and conduct ourselves, are saying, listen, as soon as you get them papers, you've read them, you can make a decision at that point and put it to the press if you want, and you can still take part in that decision-making process. Completely flies in the face of what you're saying at 2.2.
Well, I mean, Standards Commission can say what it wants about member standards, but what we're not doing is diminishing standards. We're actually increasing standards to make sure that members are most informed in order to make a decision. It's all very well making the decision off the top of your head. Oh, I've had a look at the papers, that's fine. We're going to grant this planning permission. I think it's far better if you've heard the arguments from both sides and been in the site visit. That way you're making a decision you can justify to the Standards Commission should we pulled up before them as to why you made that decision.
I would disagree with you because I would say what you're doing is restricting decision making on planning applications. The folk who are retired and are councillors, folk who've got an everyday job and can't get to these, but still take the time out to go out and be at the committee, but not at the site visit, you're restricting and you're being biased. That would be a biased decision, to say the least.
Yes, please. I mean, I accept that Ian's just as entitled to his opinion, sir, as we are. I think, with the greatest of respect to him, he perhaps demeans his argument by making reference to the Standards Commission. I mean, that is an organisation which, after all, if my experience is anything to go by, and at least 2, if not 3 occasions, has submitted complaints to me, and I've immediately banged them back and said, in the interests of natural justice, you tell me exactly what I'm being accused of. And eventually they've had to give up and say, no, you're quite right. So I would hold no truck, and I go back to the time that Jane Maitland-Neer and I went to the Standards Commission Roadshow in Ayr several years ago, but that's neither here nor there. That's not really what I wanted to say. If it's logical, if it makes sense within the parameters and the context, Chair, of a local review body, my argument is that it makes as much sense, as it were, within the concept of the Planning Applications Committee. That's where I'm coming from. And as I say, greatest respect to Ian and his views as always, but this is one where I personally feel, in fact, that you've asked for it to be called in. I agree with you, and as I say, we'll let democracy take its course.
I agree with you. If you've not been to a site visit, you should do. But my only worry is it's a bit like calling the last thing we discussed. That means the site visits have to be quoted.
Aye.
Yeah. So if we don't have a quorum right there, then that whole application would have to get deferred. So all you need is some snow. I'm just being devil's advocate here. I'm in favour of what you're proposing, right? But a bit of practicality. So does it then? And looking at Alec for advice here, does it mean then that you have to go through a committee process to make for the timing of the site visit?
I understand both sides of the argument. I was hoping to kind of find the middle road. I do accept that the local review bodies are set up in that way in terms of all the appeal processes and things like that. What I would suggest to you is that if you want to go down, I'm happy to recommend it either from this committee to the council, but there are issues in relation to site visits, as members are acknowledging. Site visits are fixed up on an ad hoc basis. Quite often a site visit will be occurring. The practicalities we can overcome. I can just tell planning officers, you do not arrange a site visit when there's another committee on or anything like that, or where members are away meeting Scottish ministers. You're right, if you're going to do that, and you are going to have to be quoted on the site visit.
No, but what about when members are at work as well, where they've got other jobs? This is the whole basis. This is why it was set up the way it is now in 2007, so that people could have part-time work and be a councillor at the same time. It wasn't just for the retired people.
They don't know it.
If you take away the fact, if you got to have a site visit and you take away the specific time, that's different. But it's because you're saying you've got to be at a site visit at a certain time with a certain amount of people there. That's the difficulty. You can site visit any time, and quite often do for local knowledge. You didn't have to be specifically round about with a bunch of the same people there at the same time.
Nothing changed in 2007. The only thing that changed in 2007 was instead of having one member, one ward, they made it 3 or 4 member wards. Nothing else changed. This council operates exactly the same way as it did prior to 2007.
The reason it was brought in was to try and allow people. That's why the extra money was given, to allow people, working people who are still working, to give them a chance to come in and be councillors as well. So there's a better representation across councils. That's why it was brought in.
That's nothing to do with site visit. I mean, at the end of the day, you become a member. If you become a member of the council, you've got a duty to the people you represent. And the same way as you pick your committees, if you know a committee is going to be quite onerous and you've got a job to do, you try and make sure you don't go on that committee. And if people who've got the time to take that committee do go on it. Now, if you can't handle that commitment, that's entirely your affair.
Tom, I'm on more committees than anybody else of this council. I attend more meetings than anybody else of this council. So don't point the finger at me as if I've got some kind of under workload. I'm saying this is for everybody's in the same pressure, so don't start picking folk out. All I'm saying is put my point across.
I'm not picking you. I'm making the point is that people have got commitments, right? No, I'm sorry. Look, if you want to go and check the records, you'll find the councillor that's attended the most meetings is myself, right? And it's a way a lot more than you've attended. I can assure you. Ivor, you want to come in there? Ivor.
Chair, it's one of those things, if you go on a site visit, a guided one, you sometimes get more information, other times you don't. If you did get more information when being there, then you're at an advantage to other members who weren't at that specific meeting. There could be a case where you go on an unattended site visit, and an unattended site visit, the owner might just say, oh, come here. And then you're putting yourself in an awkward position. Well, I was there and the owner told me. Well, sorry, you shouldn't have been in that position yourself because what else was said? And then you might be up the road to the Standards Committee.
Because it's up to the member's discretion. That's got nothing to do with the council.
Chairman, local review bodies, you normally choose to go on an accompanied site visit, which means there's a planning officer present. If you went on an unaccompanied site visit, you could go any time you wanted, because there would not be a planning officer present. Is it maybe a middle ground that the committee or the planning applications committee determine on the day, is this to be a site visit accompanied by an officer? If so, you can't vote if you don't attend, or is it an unofficial site visit, in which case members go under their own steam? Is that maybe some middle ground, and that might cover the issue?
Sir, do you want in there?
Well, it may do, sir, but just going back to the point that Ivor raised about unaccompanied site visits, I don't do them any longer because the last one I did, it was a village in the South Machars, a contentious item. Went there, let me say for the record, in my own time and at my own expense, and at the end of the day, first thing I got was accosted by one of the objectors. I said, look, there's people, my exact words were, we've already been clocked. There are people at their windows. I said, I don't want to speak to you, I don't want to hear what you've got to say. I'm here to familiarise myself with the site. And at the end of the day, it got a bit acid, but he ultimately, had to respect, my wishes. And I thought afterwards, no, I'll not put myself in that position again. I'd done a number, I've got to be candid and say so before then, but it only takes one, as I say, and at the end of the day, people can get entirely the wrong impression of what you're about. So as I say, I would shy away where at all possible from, I do now personally, and I think everyone should shy away from unaccompanied site visits. They're a disaster waiting to happen, or can be.
Apologies, I don't sit in planning application. Sounds like I'm quite pleased at that. So it may have changed since obviously the committees did planning. I just talk through that. At the moment, obviously, a site visit can only be called if that committee, when a plan application comes before it, says we want a site visit. It can't be called. And as a result of that, as things stand at the moment, is say that plan application is before a committee, you determine you want a site visit. Is it only the members who were at that first committee it can then make a decision when it comes back to committee after the site visit? So you're so you could potentially be straight away restricting your numbers at that particular point. I mean, I think if we do go down this route, I think a site visit effectively has to be dealt with almost in exactly the same way as a committee has to be dealt with in terms of the committee, the diary and everything. It can't just be a case of, well, an officer emails round everybody saying there's a site visit on Wednesday afternoon. I think an actual slot has to be built into the committee diary, giving members sufficient notice of a site visit, and it's dealt with in the same way almost as if it's a committee meeting as much as anything else, because that's effectively what we're being asked to do, is to formalise a site visit as part of the committee meeting. And I take on board what Ian's saying about the pressures. That means you have to give everybody who was at that first committee the opportunity to attend that site visit, and I think sufficient notice if we're going to go down this route.
I think that's a very valid point, Chairman. We can address that, but at the moment we put in the diary slots for employment appeals subcommittees. They may or may not be necessary. So we could build in that 1 day a month or 1 day every 2 months was laid aside by the planning committee for members to undertake site visits. If there were site visits, they would happen. If there were none called for, that day would just become a free day for members. We can build that into the diary, and I'm grateful to Colin for that.
Point is, I think what really is important is at the same time, and this is an onerous addition. I don't know how quickly site visits happen at the moment. I don't sit in planning, but what's really important is that we don't effectively hold up the planning process. As a result of this, I think it becomes overly bureaucratic, and at the end of the day, we want to streamline how long it takes a plan application to go through. We don't want to hold it up.
Richard?
Yeah, well, probably the way forward's been suggested by Alec there, but it says in the recommendations are to allow people who don't attend the site visit is still permitted to determine the application. That's the recommendation, is it?
As I say, I was taking a very pragmatic point of view. Clearly members, or some members, are not happy with that, and I do understand that the members can be approached when they go on an informal basis by either an objector or an applicant. I think if that's the protection that members are looking for, I don't have an issue with that, and I can go either way. My recommendation was purely on the basis of pragmatism and the very issues that Councillor Crothers was raising in relation to availability and whether you were then going to be quoted, etc., etc.
So there were good reasons for that recommendation.
Right, we've got a motion on the table, Julie seconded. Andy, you want to-
Just very quickly, I actually think it's fraught with danger, any member of the planning committee going on a lone visit to a site. Absolutely fraught with danger. And personally, I wouldn't dream of doing it, because it just opens up the opportunity for one side or the other side to absolutely have a real pop at you.
It's one of the reasons why organised site visits under the tutelage of planning officer were brought in, because in the old days, members would say, can we postpone this? And they'd all go off, visit individually. We never knew whether some had been to see it or not. Some would talk to an applicant, some would talk to an objector, and we're folk only get an objective view. And that's one of the reasons why it's decided site visits are fine, provided there is an officer there who runs the meeting, tells the public, you're not entitled to speak, you're here to, we might ask you for information, but you're not entitled to make a case that you've had that opportunity. And I'm happy to move what I moved earlier with the addendum that a specific day is laid aside in the diary for site visits. Well, we already have 1 day a month put by for local review bodies anyway, and to be fair, it's very doubtful if that's ever used any more than 3 or 4 times a year, so we can accommodate it that way. And if Alistair agreed with that addendum, I would so move.
No problems with supporting you, sir.
Is there an amendment? Okay. Thanks very much. Can we go to the first recommendation, which was 2.1? The one, I think it was Councillor Dempster raised this one. Are members happy to change that one? Because did make a bit of a mockery of the process. 2.2 I think we've dealt with, and 2.3 that is a recording of an apology if a replacement member has to call up. Yeah, was that yourself, Anne? Right. Okay. Members happy with that? Richard?
Take a point there. We had a meeting yesterday to set the council. It was quite confusing the way the procedures went there. There was a budget table, then amendment to that budget, and then another budget put. That was quite confusion. I think we should maybe ask groups for the view of that meeting and see that it's a better procedure we can look at next year. We had a template which we could have put towards the meeting, but we weren't sure how we could introduce it. There was policy development things which hadn't gone before any of the service committees produced in both budgets. Should we be saying, well, after the budget these should be scrutinised by the service committee? So perhaps we should be asking groups for their view of how that procedure went, so the next one is less confusing. Perhaps there was procedural motions put forward, and things were deemed incompetent because, such as the SFL, which.
With the greatest of respect to Richard, some of the things he's saying may very well be valid, but it's not for this forum today, Chair.
No, what I'm saying is, could we look at it in a future meeting, the procedures for the budget and the budget meeting?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, you can. The only requirement was to fix a budget by the end of February, I think it is, of any year. There's no requirement. We still get to public consultation, although that is no longer a legal requirement, I don't think. I mean, we do a lot of things with our budget that other authorities don't do, and at the end of the day, the administration could turn up here on the day, say, that's our budget, is there any alternatives? No, right, we're proceeding to the vote, bang, you're in and out here in 5 minutes, because it's been done that way before, because I've done it myself, and it makes life a lot simpler. You get home for your lunch, and Mr. Haswell, you have anything to say?
Chairman, I think I understand where Councillor Brodie's coming from. What I would say to you is that the Council agreed the budget process. You have now a further agreed budget process. Every group had the opportunity of presenting their budget. The conduct of the meeting yesterday had nothing to do with the budget process. The conduct of the meeting was in accordance with standing orders, in that the chairman of the committee, or the leader of the Council, has the right to rule on issues of competency and relevancy. That's a standing order, straightforward. The leader took advice and determined on relevancy or competency yesterday. When you have a motion coming forward, as we had, other members are entitled to bring forward amendments. You could have argued that the single amendment that came forward did not accord with the Council's previously agreed budget process. The leader, in the interest of democracy, decided and determined he would allow that to come forward, and that's always going to be a case in a council meeting. I think, in my experience, yesterday's was probably one of the better, or one of the best budget meetings I've ever been to. Well, I had clear direction. I had one budget and I had an alternative budget, albeit the alternative budget was amended slightly, but there's provision in standing orders to allow you to do that. I don't think you can legislate, and we're in severe danger. I'm looking at all the changes we're making to standing orders, and maybe I'm getting owl, but we're in severe danger of here trying to legislate for every eventuality, and you can't do that, because people being people will find a way around it. So I'm not sure where you're coming from, Richard. Maybe we could talk offline and maybe have a chat about it. I wouldn't like to go away with a remit that I don't really understand.
I think I'll formulate my thoughts a bit more clearly so that I can bring it to you.
Colin, you want?
Yeah, I mean, I think you cannot legislate for members' behaviour. That's the bottom line. I mean, we have a very agreed process which resulted in a draft budget being published several months ago and consulted on, and a final budget being proposed and circulated to every single member. Now, if other members wish to bring forward last-minute templates, as they describe them, up their sleeve to spring on people on the day, but maybe not know how to spring on people, then I think that's about the members' conduct. I don't think that's about the process. My view is that the budget is an important thing to carry out, and you should really actually be in a position whereby if you've got a particular budget and a particular template, you actually make sure that all members are aware of what that budget is before we actually enter the meeting. And I think if that happens, then you actually do not have a situation which we had yesterday, but that's about member conduct, that's not about the budget process.
Okay, I think if you want to speak to Alec after the meeting, Richard, that'll be fine. No further business, thank you all for attending.
Item 7, Chairman. I need decisions, Chairman.
Look at that. Sorry about that. Item 8, Education Committee,
Item 7.
Parent Council representation.
7.
No, 7. Item 7. Review of outside bodies.
Oh, sorry. Don't know too many pages there. God. Right, review of outside bodies. Alec, anything to add to this?
Not really, Chairman. I'll switch mic on, my apologies. Not really, it's a follow-up to decisions that you've already taken. I think there is a need for us to review not only the number of outside bodies we're represented on, but how we are represented. It'll not be the first time my members found themselves in a very awkward position in relation to a declaration of interest, simply because they've been attending an outside body. So we are doing a piece of work, and this basically sets out a piece of work. It asks you to look at a decision taken by the EEI committee on the regeneration groups across Dumfries and Galloway. I think there is a need. These groups are all set up on a kind of ad hoc basis. There's one of them, I think, chaired by an MP. I can't understand why a group on which the council is represented is. And I'm not picking the politics of the MP. I think what we need to do is we need to complete this review. We've got all the link officers filling out various forms and telling us why they think the group is needed and what benefit it brings to the people of Dumfries and Galloway, because that's what these groups should be all about. So we're in a situation, I'm looking for decisions, noting the work that we've undertaken so far and the fact that we'll come back to members and look at the recommendation that's come forward from the EEI committee and take that forward, Chairman.
Chair, it's just with regard to the consultation process that's going on. Would we as a committee have the chance to actually have some of the groups in here to ask them questions? Because I know through the scrutiny and performance committee we do that, and it gives us a more informed position to actually address things from. I don't know whether other members would be keen on that or not.
I certainly would, sir, because I've got to say that, I appreciate that, 87 link officers have returned questionnaires. There's a further 9 expected. I would hope, in fact, that these are now to hand. My worry in this, sir, is that, this authority over the years has been rather gung-ho, for want of a better term, in putting its members into external organisations or outside bodies without, in my view, very often the adequate backup and support which these members are entitled to expect. And this is an issue which is long overdue. Because, particularly when you finish up in an outside body as a director or a trustee of that, you can really very, very quickly find yourself in hot water, not necessarily through any fault of your own, but through inadequate backup and support, etc. And this is an issue that we've really got to get to grips with as an authority. It's taken longer than I personally would have liked to have got there, but I have no problems with what Ivor is suggesting, as long as it's not deemed to be holding up the process.
Can I say, Chairman, I've no issue with what Councillor Hislop's suggesting. I just need guidance. I'll come back to members for guidance as to which groups you're going to invite to come in. Because in my experience, if you invite 5 groups in, they'll finish up being groups ad infinitum, and the other 90 odd that aren't invited in finish up being disbanded. I think if we put it in context, Chairman, if I can, a lot of these groups were set up at a time when we didn't have the public engagement and public consultation procedures that we've got in place. It was a way of engaging the community. Dare I say at the press? Some of them were set up by my former colleagues who didn't want to take a decision and weren't prepared to ask members to take a decision. And I'm sorry if I'm not being critical of members, I'm being critical of my former colleagues who took the view that the first thing they had to do was set up a group. rather than come to members and say, I've got some recommendations for you, you're prepared to take decisions. But I think with community engagement now, and the way we go through the community engagement process, I think the budget was a brilliant example of that. It may be that we would use that rather than a group of people who become very self-centred and self-interested and particularly focused on an issue, a local issue. So maybe that's something that we will bring forward. I do take the point Councillor Geddes is making. This has been a long and slow piece of work. I pay tribute to Claire in particular. She's been, the amount of research and the amount of work she's done has been colossal in terms of this, and I'm looking forward to seeing her final version and how she's going to recommend to this committee how you take things forward. If members determine after they've got that they want to bring groups in, I've no issue with that.
Chair, it was just with regard to the EE&I committee had asked us to do a piece of work. That was a specific one I wanted to do, rather than the whole, because the other one's already started, but this looked like it was new work coming, and we could maybe have a look at the governance arrangements, because we are sort of looking at the schemes of delegation and governance and stuff. So I thought that was maybe appropriate, just on this occasion, just to see how it works. It might not need to be rolled out.
Thanks, Chair. I kind of agree there should be an access for these groups to folk. And I can see a benefit in having an MP on one of these groups, particularly if it's a reserved issue to Westminster, right? Because that's a direct route. My only suggestion would be, if we're going to do it for Cores, and I think that's the one we're referring to here, you better do it before May the 15th either, because they might not be there after that.
We're hoping to breed better than pandas do.
I think, I'm not sure if we're getting cross-purposes here. I think we're in regards to what Ivor was saying. I think he was referring to 2.2, but Alistair was maybe picking up at 2.1 in regards to outside bodies. 2.2 to me is just it's another kick in the grass. That's what I felt like when I read it. We've had it here. It's been brought up by Richard and myself in particular as many times. It got put to the EEI committee. We thought actually got to get a report and make a decision, because that's the final decision-making body. They said, no, we'll just note this, that the ad hoc review scheme of delegations committee is looking at it. We'll put it back to them, comes back to this, and what are we doing? It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. This is long grass, to say the least. When we got to do something about this? I seen a draft report over 2 years ago. We'd have sorted this out. It's unbelievable, this. Come on, let's get it bottomed out and get it finished. That's as much as I'm going to say. Next time I'll go to town.
I think we have to be clear what we've been asked to do here. We've not been asked to determine the future of these organisations. That's not for this committee. That's a matter for the Economy, Environment and Infrastructure Committee. And they took a position around which committees and which outside bodies to retain and which outside bodies they may no longer wish to retain. And Corries was an outside body that the committee by and large no longer wished to retain. However, they wanted to look at other ways in which we can engage, for example, with Scottish Enterprise around projects within that locality. It was very clear at that meeting that what we were looking at was strengthening the role of area committees to make sure there's proper member scrutiny and engagement, and more importantly, there's public engagement through community meetings. So we're not being asked, this committee, to determine future numbers of regeneration committees. That's not a matter for this committee. All this committee was asked to do was to look at the governance arrangements for any new structures that were put in place, and that's our remit, to look effectively at the governance around it, not the actual future of these particular organisations. I would be kind of concerned if you're saying bring in to speak to individuals from these organisations, that somehow that looks as if we're consulting on effectively the future of those organisations or the structures of all those organisations. That isn't our remit. What we're being asked to do is to look at the governance arrangements and actually have an element of consistency across the board, which we don't have at the moment, because we're all set up in a very, very ad hoc way over a period of time.
Ian?
I agree with exactly what Colin said. I don't think we should have these groups in to ask them how do they work, how would they help the council, so on and so forth. Richard and I brought up serious concerns previously. We've got in Arran, it's done a good job, and I've always said that. People think I'm totally against the Arran Region Steering Group, like anything but. They're a good job, but we're sitting with a governance structure there that allows local businessmen, local people to come in and seek and sit and listen to confidential information and influence decisions that goes forward in the council. It's unacceptable. Would we do it with the Business Transformation Steering Group earlier? Not a chance. Why do we do it in Arndale and Eskdale? We need to get this bottomed out. And that's all I'm saying. It says recommendations are to note. Note. We need to agree to do something. That's all I'm saying. It's been run about, let's do something.
Well, hopefully we'll get something forward to the next meeting because, Alec, can you give that promise?
Yeah, Chairman, what we're saying is we're giving you an update on where we are in terms of the review, and we've been asked to do a specific piece of work by the EI committee. We will do that piece of work and we'll come back, run it by members of this subcommittee who will then make recommendations on future governance arrangements for these issues. As I say, a lot of these groups were set up on an ad hoc basis simply because we were looking for a way of consulting local people on local issues. We've now got the area committee community meetings, we've got better standards of engagement with the public, and I think everybody's round the rooms agreeing. We're not suggesting that these be retained and taken forward. We're looking for an alternative way of making sure that we get the input from the local people.
Okay, thanks very much. Can we move to the recommendations? 2122.
We'll come back with revised governance arrangements to enable the EI committee to determine if they want to run with that, as opposed to running with the... Yep.
Thanks for that. Move on to item 8, Education Committee Parent Council representation. That one, Alec?
Chairman, I have this one came in off left field for me, I must admit. I have no issue with it. I think we're asking that members look at consideration of having a parent council representative on the education committee. Can I say that I've also had a request that we look at non-teacher representatives from trade unions on the committee. I'll be bringing a report back on that in due course. And it begs the question, how will we then got community councils want to be represented in a non-voting capacity on area committees? How far do you want us to take this? I could finish up with a trade union representative on every committee of the council. And is that what members want? Because I think we need to, rather than do this piecemeal, I think we need to do a bigger piece of work.
You've mentioned lots of different organisations, but you haven't mentioned children, and after the intervention of the Children's Commissioner, then should there be a representative of children? That's another question you've got to ask. And they're the most important people in the education system.
Am I first yet? Okay, right. We've got an anomaly in integration where the NHS have a staff member on the board who could be then on the joint board and also be, I appreciate the circumstances right now is because of this one individual, but the circumstances could be because he's also then the trade union lead in negotiations with the health board. So if we don't have some form of representation, at least in some committees, for our trade union members, they're going to be marginalised in that joint process. But I take Alec's point. Do we really want, as a trade unionist, do we really want a trade union representative on every single committee? And I think that's something that would have to be debated at length, I would suggest. But we would certainly have to support something in the new integrated process so that our staff have the same level of representation as the NHS staff.
I would say to Councillor Ferguson, I think that's actually covered in that the governance arrangements surrounding the integrated joint board, I did due diligence on them earlier this week. They're going out to public consultation today. So members will have a copy today, and there is provision there not only for the 10 representatives of the council, 5 from the council and 5 from the NHS. There's provision in there for other bodies to attend, but not in a voting capacity. So that is covered in that particular aspect of it. What I'm asking members is, do you want a bigger piece of work done here, or do you want to just make a decision in isolation, which you can do today? There's nothing to prevent you. The law is quite clear. You can make that decision. But I think if you do it with parent council representatives, you're going to have to look at the wider remit. And then it becomes, do we have a community council representative on every area committee? If so, how do you pick that community council representative? I'm asking for guidance here, sir.
Can I come back in, Tom?
I mean, I think it does. The report does bring to light a large number of anomalies. We do have a situation where the only committee of this council that has staff on it effectively is the Education Committee. And you have the anomaly whereby the Education Committee did a thorough review, for example, of the support and learning process, and then which involved a committee involving teacher representatives. However, that then goes to full council, as we've seen yesterday, and people try to unpick the review where there are no teacher representatives on full council. So you do have the anomaly whereby the teacher representatives are represented at one committee that looks at a particular issue, and it goes to another committee where there are no teacher representatives, and there are different decisions made. I mean, I'm sure Richard's being a wee bit kind of jovial when he says we should put children on, for example, the Education Committee, because he obviously implies that the only thing that young people are interested in is education. Well, actually, I know a lot of young people that are interested in employment. So we should have one on the EI Committee. I know a lot of young people that are interested in social work and future care packages for young people. We should have one on social work as well. We should actually have one on community and customer services, because they're interested in what happens in welfare reform. They're also interested in what happens in sport and leisure. And actually, maybe we should have an older person as well. Although, to be fair, when we look around our councillors, then we probably all meet that criteria, or most of us do. Anyway, so that's probably covered, you know. So I think where exactly do you draw the line? And I think it does raise a number of anomalies. I think, you know, we can't stereotype, as Richard does, in terms of young people being on education when they've actually got an input to a whole host of services. It raises the issue about whether we're satisfied that our trade unions, our parents, our teachers, our young people are properly consulted before it gets to the stage of committees at the end of the day. That's maybe the issue there. I think we've come an awful long way when it comes to that consultation and speaking to people. And I think that if we're simply going down the route of saying let's include all sorts of stakeholders on committees, then you're actually saying to yourself, well, we don't consult them before it gets to a committee stage. And I think that's a problem. I've got concerns, I have to say, with this particular report. But, you know, I'll see what other members want to say in terms of taking it forward.
Are you back in, Andy?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm not disagreeing with anything Colin's actually said there, but I think if we look at the Education Committee in particular, we've got teachers represented, but teachers are something like 60% of the staff in that department. So how do we get the views of the non-teachers who are involved in frontline services in that department heard? Now, I understand it's through legislation, that's why it's done, yeah? But in terms of equity, because then you've got your three recognised trade unions for the non-teaching staff, no represented, but you've got the teaching staff representatives in there.
Can I make a point here? It's probably the fault of previous councils. Up until, I think it was the early 90s, it was part of legislation, it was the law of the land, that you had to have 3 religious representatives as detailed there. It was also the law of the land, you had to have 2 teacher representatives, one representing the primary sector, one representing the secondary sector. I think it was Mrs Thatcher's government, I think Forsyth was the state for Scotland at the time, deemed that teachers should no longer be statutorily on education committees. This authority, or its predecessor, along with other authorities in Scotland, kept teachers on, just as a mark of continuation. They're no longer statutory appointees, we kept them on, right? So the only statutory appointees to any committee are the 3 church representatives. This council could actually say, let's make it simple, take the teacher reps off. They're not trade union representatives. Let's make that quite clear. They do not represent trade unions. They're there to represent teachers. One from the primary sector, one from the secondary sector. The fact that one of them might well be a prominent trade unionist is neither here nor there. They're not elected by their trade union. They're elected by their peers in a ballot. Now, it is a ballot to elect. I didn't want to get, I mean, if we do it the way we do it for teachers, in order, because always seek from the churches is nominations. The churches get together and give us the 3 nominations. Teachers have got to be elected by their peers. Now, if you want to go to the extent of having children, with 22,000 children in this area, we'll then go to ballot every child between nursery age and 18 in order to make sure we get representation in the Education Committee. If we want to have trade union members, then we ballot every trade union member. So there is a process for teachers being appointed, and I think, all we've been asked to do today is to appoint the parent council representatives, and I think we need to look at how we appoint the parent council representatives. And as far as extending it, I think that's a matter for another day, and I would certainly not, myself. We're democratically elected by the people to make decisions on their behalf. The more people we keep co-opting who have no democratic remit, then you destroy democracy, quite frankly. And the only other committee I can think of with representation was, I think, the old housing committee with tenant representatives, but they had no voting rights. But as Alex says, if you get to the extent you start inviting community council members onto your area committees, we have enough trouble with some of the common good committees with representatives from...
I think, Chairman, maybe members are getting the hint I'm going to be a bit outspoken for the next few meetings that I attend. I think you've gone right to the heart of it. You guys stand every 4 years in front of the people of Dumfries and Galloway. You say, I'm standing to represent you on your council. Are you prepared to vote for me? And the answer you guys got was yes. I have real concerns if we do have better public engagement facilities available to us and we use them, which is now enshrined in the law. And I think I'm getting a hint here from members. Rather than do this report in isolation, can I suggest that you maybe want to get a good look at if you want to continue to engage with the public by having them attend your meetings? Because once you do this one, I know the trade unions are going to be trapping my door tomorrow, asking me why I haven't brought a report on trade union representative on the Education Committee. And my answer to them in the past was, I need to get member guidance on this. And it doesn't only affect the Education Committee, it affects all committees, as Colin said. It affects the full council. So maybe what you want to do, rather, and I don't want to push the committee, is to say, let's have a good, thorough look at this, bring us back a report, and we'll then determine what recommendations we're going to put to full council.
But have we been charged with full council of actually making a decision on this?
No.
Right. No, I do have my reservations. I see this as thin end of the wedge, quite frankly. Might as well back up. Ian?
I think I'm not exactly precious about this, Ken, but I thought it was possibly a good idea putting the parent councillors on. I think it was Dumfries Town in particular. For me, it came through there and it added a lot of value. But we found out things and we really got to the heart of what people were thinking. And I think that's where it kind of stemmed from, even though there was other things indicated within the report. But I'm not overly precious because, like you say, where do you stop? I think it's fair at common goods. We have it in Annan. I think it's a great thing in Annan. Dumfries is a different set of circumstances there, where sometimes you can be a wee bit more strained. But it's I'm happy to either way when it comes to this. Either agree with recommendations or let's see a report coming back. If we do it for these, what's the possible effects across the whole council and other committee structures?
Richard?
I was going to support you, Chair, to take it today and make a decision on it, on its merits. But there are obviously repercussions, but I'm quite willing to discuss it.
Yeah, I think that there's no doubt, going back to what Mr Hassel has said, Chair, that, we operate, and we've got to operate, let's be realistic about it, on the basis of representative democracy. But that's not to say that, in appropriate circumstances, you don't set out the groundwork or the ground rules, as it were, to encourage participatory democracy as well. And now, I have no problems with what's been before us today, sir, and what's been suggested, and I think that we've been given a remit to discharge. My understanding is that nobody really has any objections to offer to that, and I would suggest that it'd be better if we discharged it today. I would make reference to the fact, Chair, and I trust, and I emphasise, I trust that Mr Haswell is aware of it. There's certain work, in quotation marks, going on at the moment in Wigtonshire about the possibility of community council representatives, as it were, being given a locus and a role, as it were, on that area committee. I see your bruise going down. At the end of the day, we are not trying to declare UDI. We're sort of trying to feed into a process And again, I mean, it goes back, and that's based in history, Chair, let me be honest about it. And in the days of the Mid-Galloway Area Committee, it was a superb area committee, and I would have to say, due in no small measure to Sandra McDowell's, inclusive and competent chairmanship. I mean, every meeting, people, probably 30, 40, 50 people turned up there, community representatives, mostly community council representatives, but not all, and they were encouraged, as it were, to have their input and their say and all the rest of it. They did not, and they respected it. They did not get involved in the decision making. But and as I say, it was a good forum, and it enhanced members' information immeasurably. What we're trying to do is not necessarily replicate that, but recognise that and see, in fact, if we can bring forward something which would build on it. And I think that's a legitimate and a valued exercise. It'll be interesting to see when it comes to the full area committee, because it's been done at the moment on the basis of working groups. But the principle I'm pointing out, sir, is that while I am a firm adherent of representative democracy, I think, as I say, if you can temper it to the extent of having as much participative democracy as you can in appropriate circumstances, that, Chair, is something that we should be looking at.
Right.
I mean, I think, though, there's a big difference between people being on a committee and people being consulted at a committee meeting. I think they're two very different things altogether. And I think we are starting to move away from what the role we were actually asked to perform today, which was there was a recommendation from the Education Committee to full council. We may all have concern about it, but Education Committee took a decision they wanted to recommend to full council, and what we are effectively being asked to do is a piece of work around how that would work in practical terms should full council decide they want to pursue that particular route. I think there's nothing wrong with us as a committee saying actually we've got concerns with that particular route when it comes to our recommendations, if you like. But I think we're just being asked to what is the nuts and bolts going to be? How would this work in practical terms? We have a massive anomaly at the moment whereby we have teachers on the Education Committee. That's only there because it's historical. Let's be perfectly honest. We're starting on a blank sheet of paper, and there hadn't been a historical situation where teachers are on the Education Committee. Do you think any of us would be saying, actually, we should have teachers on the Education Committee because actually you don't have workers, ground maintenance workers on DG First Committee. You don't have planners on the Planning Committee. But we have teachers on the Education Committee, and it is a major anomaly at the moment. But that's, as we say, it's only there because, frankly, historical reasons. Let's be perfectly honest. And I think we have to make a decision today on what the nuts and bolts would be should we decide to do so. And I think we could flag up our concerns about this, and no doubt there'll be debate around that at full council, basically. But I think this is about looking at the nuts and bolts on if we decide to go down this route, what the actual position would be. What the question I would have is it appears to be being suggested that effectively the Parent Carer Council Forum makes the decision, if you like, to appoint these particular people. And what I just want to know is how representative that forum is. Is every single community council represented in that particular forum?
Well, I think you've got to bear in mind, not every school is a parent council.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite a number of smaller schools don't have a parent council. I mean, I don't know, do you want to defer today? That might be a better idea. The point you've raised, Colin, about they're seeking one organisation to make nominations. How representative is that organisation of the schools across the region? I think in terms of trade unions, there used to be a mechanism for meeting with trade unions. I don't think it's appropriate for trade unions to use a committee as a place to air grievances about a particular department. That is not what committees are for. I think what maybe needs to be done is to set up the old committee we used to have. We used to have one specifically for education, where like 7 or 8 members of the education committee would meet with representatives of all the teaching unions. We used to have an SGNC that met on a regular basis with representatives of all the unions for general matters. And that is the best forum for trade unions to put their views forward to elected members rather than the confines of a committee. Andy?
Yeah, getting back to the business in hand, if we leave the trade unions and stuff like that aside, then Colin's points are actually well made about some of their service committees. This is about the recommendation is about these primary schools and parent teachers things. My worry, okay, is my personal history of things like this, is we need to actually check before we do anything that the election process is robust in each and every parent-teacher thing, and then from there onto that forum. Because I've been at meetings where there's been 3 positions vacant, 1, 2, 3, and it's like, well, you want to be treasurer, I'm secretary, and you're chair, right? Because do all the parents, for example, right? Here's an example, in a primary school, get a vote, or is it who turns up at the PTA meeting, then votes? If that's the case, that's no democracy, right? If they're then going to be onto a forum, that's a democratic forum.
Well, that's the point I was making about deferring it, because A, we don't know how representative this body is, how many schools are representative.
Yeah.
I don't know, I mean, obviously it's all been left to the education department. I don't know if they've actually issued guidelines. When I've been the parent council at my school for the last wee while, they seem to have an AGM, and it's who turns up.
Yes.
Right? Now, a school roll with about 250 parents and about 30 turn up. So that's who's electing your parent councils. So I think we probably need more information about how the whole thing is organised. Ian?
I would agree with you entirely, and I would move that we actually get a report back, being outlining a lot of things that Alec touched on earlier in regards to how it affects the Education Committee and the wider effects across the committee structure across the council. And that's what we're touching on in broad terms, isn't it? There's loads of people have added, loads of different bits that would like to, scenarios and that they'd like to have seen in particular. But I think if we can pick up on these, we can listen back to the minute, to the recording and such like, or the plenty of notes being taken. And we do have a joint consultative group. I was thinking when Andy was going on there.
Chairman, could I follow what Councillor Smith said? He's just thrown a spanner into the works. How are we going to deal with the teacher representatives if we've got a children, lifelong learning, etc. committee? Because I recall previously the teacher representatives come in and dealt with education committee matters, as did the church representatives, and then left. So I think maybe there's a wider issue that members would want to look at. I'm not asking that you don't take a decision. If you want to take a decision, you've got enough information there to take it. What I'm suggesting is it's got fairly major ramifications that you might like to at least give some consideration to before making a final decision.
I mean, I think first I say we have to respect the Education Committee's decision, but I couldn't make a recommendation on how we would elect a parent council representative until I had more information around the Parent Carer Council Forum, how representative that was, how they would effectively choose the representative to be on the Parent Council. I need a wee bit more information around that. I don't know what the structure is, I don't know what the representatives is. So from taking forward the Education Committee's very reasonable recommendation, and that's the job of what we've got to do here, I can make a decision on that based on the information. I would like to see more information on that. There is a second part around how we, as part of the previous report, maybe we should have mentioned it then, how we take forward the whole issue of the committee structure and representation on that. And I think Alec raised a valid point there about how we deal with the children's, etc., committee that will have a social work remit when it comes to teacher representatives. I think there's a bigger piece of work, and that piece of work is about the other report, maybe not necessarily this one, but I think it's worth flagging it up at that point, that we should be looking at the whole issue as part of the wider committee structure of the council. But in the short term, I would be uncomfortable making a decision on how the parent council representative would be elected without having more information on the council forum.
Well, I think that's what I was moving anyway, that we need to get more information now. I mean, we might find out at the end of the day we've got a parent forum there that's only representative of 70 schools across the region. It's not representing another third of the schools in the region. And it's whether we decide that we don't want them to nominate, we'd rather have all parents participating, and they elect. I mean, that's we need information, that kind of thing. That I think we'll have opened a tin of worms with this one. But I think there's other ways of communicating without people being co-opted onto committees, quite frankly. Because at the end of the day, you're there to make corporate decisions. It's very nice to have people putting their input, but some people are single issue individuals in any case. They've nothing to add except their own particular board. But are members happy to leave these recommendations off at the moment, make one recommendation, defer to get more background information to make a more informed decision? Members happy with that?
Yep.
Thank you all very much. I definitely have no further business. We'll close the meeting. Thank you all for your forbearance.